Hello, welcome to another episode of Album Musings. So we're up to episode 6. We are still in November because it will be still November when this goes out. This will go out on the 30th of November 2022, which rather neatly coincides with the release of Thriller, which came out on November the 30th, 1982. So that's 40 years old when this video drops. Yeah. So the sixth studio album for Michael Jackson, produced by Quincy Jones, who'd worked with him before on Off the Wall. Apparently, according to this, Jackson wanted to create an album where every song was a killer. And as it mentions here, in that period there was still this ongoing backlash against disco, which had started during punk and got carried over because you had punk, you had new wave, and then additionally there was a new wave of British heavy metal which was getting in the charts quite heavily. And so it was interesting to see how Michael Jackson coped with that. And when we talk about one of the tracks, we'll see possibly one way that was done. I don't know if that was specifically intentional, but we'll be talking about one of the singles where that falls into an interesting category musically. There's a lot of singles off of this album, so I'm going to be going through those, where they featured in the UK charts at the time. Obviously I lived through this. It's quite a bittersweet period for me generally, and I'll explain why when we get to my usual ramble at the end of the video. But lots to talk about, so let's go through here. Okay, let's try and place it on a discography timeline. Again, I will include links to the Wikipedia articles and sufficient links so that you can recreate the searches if you want to do them in the UK charts website. As you can see, relatively speaking, if we're talking about studio albums, then not particularly prolific compared to other artists. So I think like a lot of artists that start in the 70s, like here we've got 2 albums come out in 72, there's an album in 73, then 75, then 79. You can see the gap seemed to be getting bigger. So Thriller in 82, Bad in 87, Dangerous 91. There was this album called History, 1995, and then Invincible in 2001. But of course you have to put that against the backdrop of an artist that was doing big tours and all the other stuff that's going on around this particular artist's life over the years. So 9 tracks off of the album. And you can see there's been special editions released as we move into the, from a world when this was released of predominantly cassettes and vinyl into a world or an age of CDs and then an age of downloads and streaming. But I'm sure as you go down this list, if you've lived through that time period, then you'll probably recognise most of these as singles, and if you didn't, then there may well be 1 or 2 here that certainly sticks in the collective consciousness, even if you didn't live through those times directly. Lots of people involved with this album, ton. And I think when we go through some of the singles tracks, I'll maybe do what I don't normally do, is we will look at some of the personnel, because for some of the tracks it gets a little bit confusing as well in terms of actually who played what. But you can see people like Steve Lukather featured on quite a number of tracks. And yeah, interesting. Looks like there's a little bit of a Toto connection generally there with other members of the band, that band. And also you can see, beyond being just a producer, Quincy Jones, according to the listing here, had other involvements with certain tracks. Yeah, pretty well stocked musician wise. And then, well, what can we say? The charts, I think it speaks for itself. So that's all the weekly charts from 82 to 2022. And of course you have to bear in mind as well that the album, and we're talking about the album here, has probably bounced in and out of various national charts on numerous occasions. So in some instances it may have been bounced up the charts in terms of its highest position later on in its release schedule. And then number of end of year charts obviously featured pretty heavily. And also decade end charts and all-time charts as well. And then further on down here we've got the certifications and sales. And it's interesting to know a lot of the artists we've covered so far, when I've done the episodes, most of the time they're sort of overall charts, and then the certifications fit easily onto a single screen. Not in the case of this album. I mean, where do I even start with? It's like 34 times platinum in the US. One thing to note with this, one thing that often, look, full disclosure here, I'm not a big Michael Jackson fan. This is, I believe, probably, I'm just trying to think whether this and Off the Wall, those are the probably only two albums I've listened to end to end. Then this mainly because of Beat It and Thriller. But I probably more references because I'm, from what I remember, during the period when this was in the ascendancy, and we'd also had previously Back in Black by AC/DC. To me, in my mind, they were always vying for the best-selling album of all time. I didn't bring up Back in Black because I didn't think I was going to talk about it, actually. It only just crossed my mind. But looking at the US rating for this album, for Thriller, like it's 34 times platinum. UK 15 times platinum. And again, you have to be careful here because it's difficult to compare certifications because of the differences in the thresholds as well. But there's no denying like the sheer scale of that figure, where platinum is a million album, unit stroke sales. And again, this is the problem you get sometimes with album. Is it album? Are certifications done in a certain country by the quantity of the albums, the amount of physical units that are sold, or the value, like in sales? So that's the other thing that gets a little bit wobbly. But within a particular region, it is interesting to compare like with like. So if you were to just look at the UK sales here, it gives you a little bit of a yardstick when you're comparing it with other albums. But even so, it gets very tricky. I'd be, put it this way, I'd be cautious to try and cross compare albums from different eras, because just of, the method of distribution is so different now compared to then. And some albums, did sold well both when they came out, and then when they streamed, have streamed a lot. So it is a bit problematic, but I always like to just mention it in the episode because it does give a little bit of a indication of how that album might be held in terms of the popular culture psyche, and if you remember the album from the time, or if you don't remember it from the album from the time, maybe it was in a relative's record collection, or a sibling, an elder sibling, something like that. Album of the Year website, and this really doesn't surprise me how they've placed it popularity wise. So above Off the Wall, above Bad, Dangerous. But as we saw, you could argue there's not that many albums, relatively speaking, for this artist in terms of studio albums. So we're now going to be very firmly placed in the UK charts, as I always do with these episodes, because that's obviously my line of view on all of this, predominantly up until 2010 when I moved to Canada. So obviously if we get any albums within that period, then that possibly could change, but for consistency I might just keep with the UK charts, because I still do follow the UK charts on and off. So looking at all of the albums for Michael Jackson in relation to the UK charts, this is chronological order. So if you look at Thriller, you can see its peak position was number 1, and it got on the charts for 260 weeks. In the UK, at least, Off the Wall only got to number 3. That was its highest position ever in the UK charts, in the UK album charts. But it was on there for 225, but that's still topped by Thriller. I don't think there's any other album, and again, I'm excluding, you have to be careful here not to, be misdirected by greatest hits albums. But, because obviously we've got, number 1's got to number 1, and it was on the chart for 575 weeks. But I really like to just look purely at the studio albums, and from a studio albums perspective, there were other studio albums that did get to number 1, but nothing that both got to number 1 and was on the chart for such a long period of time. And additionally, you can see here weeks on number 1, 8 weeks on the UK chart, album charts. And I don't believe, let me just check there, when did we get to see number 1s? Yeah, it bests that greatest hits. So. And there's its initial run. And you can see it's been in and out since then, some times more than others. And obviously there could be various reasons as to why that happened. It pulsed when it did. But as always, I tend to like to just focus on the initial run. And you can see, again, interestingly, this is an interesting pattern here. I'm not sure if we've seen this before with the albums we've covered so far, where it gets in at number 1, goes off number 1 again, then it's stuck at number 2, back to number 1, starts to go out of the charts, and then comes back in again, and we'll possibly see why this might, what the connection is here. Is there a connection between this maybe and when singles were released? But you can see that's a hefty run, and of course here we're getting into the higher reaches of the charts. This is the the top 100. But we're running from December 82 right through till 06, so June of 85. Crazy. So the last time it got to number one in that run was 84. And we'll probably end up talking about, possibly, we will be, what was going on in this period in terms of the release schedule of the singles. So just to place it, so the first time it hit number one, up from number two, let me just check I've got that right. What's the date there? 5th of the 3rd, 83. Oh yeah, there's a cut-off there. 5th of March 83. So obviously number one, and again just trying to place it in a popular culture framework. So album chart for that week. What else did we have? Interesting. So Thompson Twins, Men at Work, Toto 4. So does that have stuff like Africa on it and things like that? I think it does. And the various artists, again, this point in time, the UK charts was, what's the word, troubled by certain compilation albums, which certain times of the year could distort the higher reaches of the charts. I thought the general compilation, we're not talking about greatest hits here, I thought those had been removed by this time, but maybe not. I have no idea what this is. Christopher Cross, Jane Fonda's Workout record. There's the greatest hits. So they remained in the charts for quite a number of years after they removed the compilation albums. The Lionel Richie album, Richard Clayderman, The Pianist, Echo and the Bunnymen with Porcupine, Duran Duran. So this period in time, 83, so start of 83, in the UK, you've got the whole new romantic movement going on. So Duran Duran, Eurythmics are gaining popularity. But then other things, and again we're looking at the album charts here, which is always interesting. So Journey, Frontiers, that slightly heavier Journey album, at least half of it is slightly heavier. Phil Collins' Hello I Must Be Going was floating around the charts, and so on. Eddie Grant. Okay, so the Thriller album had 7 singles off of it. However, and we'll see in a moment, one of them wasn't really released in the UK, so I won't be able to do a chart comparison. So first single off of the album was The Girl Is Mine, which was released on October the 18th, 1982. Let's just compare that. So the album came out in November of 82. So this was released just before it. And this was the one with Paul McCartney. And they'd also, if you remember before that, they recorded Say, Say, Say. And The Man for Paul McCartney's Pipes of Peace. So let's have a look at the chart run here. So highest position got to number 8, and then went out. was going to say slowly, that looks pretty fast out of the top 40. And it was alongside Eddie Grant, so now we're looking at singles. We move from albums to singles. Tears for Fears, Mad World. Clannad had a big hit with this theme from Harry's Game. This film had been shown on the BBC, I think it was the BBC. Culture Club, and there it is. Human League, Wham, Kool and the Gang, Blancmange, Duran Duran, Rio, Donna Summer, and so on. Flock of Seagulls down there. So 14th of November 82. So yeah, a little bit of lag there from when it was released. Interestingly, it peaks around the time, or well, just before the album's coming out. Is that? Yeah. Billie Jean, the next single. So January the 2nd, 83. So we're now into 83. So album's been released now in the previous year. November 30th, 82. We're into 83, January. This gets released, Billie Jean. Whoops. And let's plug this in. There it is. 83. Making a right mess here. There we go. So you can see here, you know, fair run initially, comes in and out again. Gets to number one at this point here, which is the 5th of the 3rd, 83. So yeah, a bit of a delay there. So released in January. Doesn't really make the UK charts till March. And you can see alongside here, Bonnie Tyler, Total Eclipse of the Heart, Kajagoogoo, Toto Africa. So yeah, that answers my question. So that would have been Toto 4 would have had Africa on it. Again, Eurythmics, Musical Youth, Tears for Fears Change. So, yeah, a couple of artists we've noticed already, Thompson Twins. So it gives you some idea, and this is half the point of doing it like this for me, is also, in addition to covering an album, you sort of get to see that parallel musical, like pop culture, I don't know what the best word is here, but the general, what's the background to this album musically in terms of what else is in the UK charts whilst this and all of its singles is going on. So Wham, Depeche Mode single out, Get the Balance Right. An Ice House, Bananarama, Men at Work, Fleetwood Mac in the UK charts there. Then move on to Beat It. So this was the one that I just wanted to look at this is specifically when I was saying, yeah, maybe I should look at the personnel on tracks. This is the one for me to look at, because there's been a lot of confusion over the years. So Jones apparently encouraged Jackson to include a rock song on the album, and it's got that famous guitar solo by Eddie Van Halen. So obviously another one lifted off the album. We're on to, what is this now? This is single number 3. Comes out in February 1983. The other thing about this is you probably know, again, if you either lived through it or watched listened to this stuff, watched it retrospectively, you see the level of the music videos is been raised quite considerably. And for me at the time, that was a little bit of a phenomenon. This period of the, I suppose this was really when music videos, and then of course you've got MTV, were in the ascendancy. I mean, we'd had music videos well before this period in the 80s, but people were really sort of pulling out the stops on the music video side of things. Particularly, with these like mass choreographed dances that became, a feature of the videos for both this and a subsequent video that we'll look at in a moment. Or single. I'm trying to find here where the personnel is. Does it have it here? Yeah, here we go. So, rhythm guitar. So, Steve Lukather, guitar solo. So Eddie just does the guitar solo apparently, and like a lot of people pre the internet, when I first heard Eddie Van Halen was playing on Beat It or had played on Beat It, I tended to think, oh, he must have played the whole track. And then over the years, I come to realise that, oh yeah, Steve Lukather contributed quite a bit to the track. And then you also have Paul Jackson Jr. On rhythm guitar as well. So no relation to Michael Jackson. And notice again another member of so it's got Toto all over this track. Not too familiar with the other people here. I think I might know this guy, but definitely, yeah. These 3 fellas are known to me. Oh, I see where I went wrong here. Yeah. I shouldn't have dived in quite so quickly to shoot this episode. I got really excited and just went in and I didn't check all my tabs. But no problem. So number 3 this got to on the UK charts. Again, relatively short run, although it did go in and out a couple of other times. What have we got it alongside? Oh, awesome. Let's Dance. So just to go back here and try and place this. So when did I say this came out? February 14th, 1983. Hits the charts on this particular run and gets to number 3 on the 23rd of the 4th. So again, a little bit of a lag there. And by that time, we have the power of Let's Dance out. So yeah, that was number 1 on the singles charts. Culture Club, Church of the Poison Mind. So easy to understand why Beat It may not be doing quite so well. Love is a Stranger by Eurythmics. You got Spandau Ballet Trio. Oh my word. Yeah. Oh, Blue Monday by New Order. Yes, of course that was released around now. I'll come on to that in my story at the end. Big Country, Fields of Fire, Human League. So yeah, this is great. This was 83. She's in Parties by Bauhaus. Oh yeah, this was a cool period in the charts. I'm Me by Twisted Sister. Another MTV thing. Yeah, big fan of them at the time. As was one of my brothers. He was a member of the Twisted Sister fan club. Oh, U2, Two Hearts Beat as One. Yeah. April 83. So, yeah, I was working by this time. I'd been in work for a couple of years, but I was also, the place I worked at would also send you to college. So I had my college paid for. And at this point, I was just coming up to my second year of my, my chemistry ONC? Yeah. So, well, probably May into June maybe would have been exam time. Yeah. Wow. So next single, Wanna Be Starting Something, May the 8th. Got to number 8 on the chart. So slowly you can see the singles are not doing quite so well as the previous singles. Bit of a shortish run. Yeah, it didn't take it long to get outside of the top 40. And at that point you've got Every Breath You Take by The Police in the singles charts. Flashdance. Where are we? Number 8. Oh, Yazoo. Nobody's Diary. In a Big Country. So at this point, and we'll come back to this at the end, I was going clubbing a lot, just around this period, and I'll talk a little bit more about the end of this. But a lot of these various things here were getting played a lot at clubs, and so yeah, I remember that. Temptation by Heaven 17. And of course there are a lot of dance versions as well of tracks, like 12-inch versions. I'll mention Human Nature. This wasn't released in the UK as a single, so I don't have any stats for that, but that was another single. That came out in July 1983. And then we have Pretty Young Thing, September of 83. So between those singles, I'd gone on this really fantastic holiday down to Cornwall. I went camping with a friend of mine, and got back. And after I got back, and again I'll explain a little bit in a moment, things got really interesting in my life, but in a bit of a bittersweet way. So yeah, this was next up, and it got to number 11. So again, we're seeing a bit of a fall off here. Well, quite a considerable fall off in singles popularity, at least. I imagine during this period, the album, as we saw, was probably riding high. And maybe that was it. Maybe people just didn't want to buy the singles because they already had the album. So this is the problem with this one. It's a bit of an odd one because this was released in September of 83, but didn't make the UK charts until well into 84. So at that point, it's alongside Hello by Lionel Richie, Shaking Stevens, A Love Worth Waiting For, Bananarama, Thompson Twins, Depeche Mode, People Are People. Depeche Mode were having a good degree of popularity during that time with singles, and with obviously their albums, but they have a lot of single success in the UK. There it is there. Oh, Captain Sensible had a singles career going on. Rufus and Chaka Khan. Jump by Van Halen. Simple Minds, Up on the Catwalk. So, yeah, 84. So, the reason why I highlight this, I do say so a lot, don't I? I have to keep a track on that. We have Thriller. So, Thriller came out as a single. So, this is a single Thriller on November the 5th of 1983 in the UK. And it did this bizarre thing where it got in the charts pretty much straight away. And so it was released after Pretty Young Thing, from what I gather, although I'm not sure about the release schedule in the UK, so that might be another reason. But, initially released September 83, doesn't get into the UK charts until 84. Thriller is released in November of 83 and gets to number 10 and stays in a bit longer, but again, not like the earlier singles. And that could just be like album fatigue. But this had that incredible video, the zombie one. And I can remember specifically staying in one night to watch that video go out. They sort of plays it at a specific time. I think it must have been on the BBC, one of the channels in the UK. And yeah, that was just incredibly choreographed. And it was like a mini film as well. This track also had a little bit of dialogue. I'll see if he's mentioned in the personnel here. Does it mention? Yeah, Vincent Price. Not featured in the original edited single version. But I remember this being played a lot at clubs at the time. In addition to the other tracks that I've covered so far. And there's where it places. So when it was at its highest position, number 10 in the singles charts in the UK, it's November. So interesting, just before we get into the Christmas period. And it's up there alongside Uptown Girl, Say was in there, interestingly. So that did better. Shaking Stevens, I don't know this band. Paul Young, Love of the Common People, All Night Long by Lionel Richie. Yeah, I remember that. Oh, dear. Love Cats, The Cure. So they were sort of re-establishing themselves at that point. I went to see them in 85, I think. And there's Thriller. And we got Style Council, Adamant, Rolling Stones, Thompson Twins again, Eurythmics, the usual suspects, Culture Club, Men Without Hats. 83 release of Love Will Tear Us Apart. So this is the sort of bittersweet period for me. I went on this really awesome holiday in summer of 83, and when I came back we discovered that the firm I worked for, at that point I was working in the immunology department of a local manufacturing laboratory, and it was probably one of the best positions I've had in terms of like the most interesting and the most just sheer of the amount of diversity. I was in what was called technical production. It was just me and a senior tech above me, who was a really nice guy and was also into heavier music, hard rock and metal, so we had a lot to talk about. But we'd constantly be doing all sorts of protein purification and purifying immunological serum, those sort of things, plus making quite advanced sort of test kits as well. So they had a production department which made the day-to-day stuff, and then they had a technical production department that we worked for, which made the more sort of bespoke components of the regular production, but also other, purification tasks as well. And in the process of doing that, we do a lot of work with, I'm trying to think of the technical term for this, but electrophoresis and also gel filtration, and things like how to concentrate serum using reverse osmosis and ultrafiltration, those sort of things. So super interesting job. Unfortunately, we work within a larger lab, which also were involved in other things, which wasn't quite as profitable. And there was an opportunity to subdivide the company and sell it off, and they sold off the profitable part at the time. I don't know quite what the logic was. No, that's not right, actually. Sorry, they retained the profitable part and moved it somewhere else and sold it. Sounds more logical, doesn't it? They sold off the non-profitable part. So the profitable part had to move to another part of the country where the main research lab was. And the unfortunate thing is that only certain senior positions got offered relocation expenses. And it was, quite good in terms of being able to set up. And I was pretty young at the time. I would have been about 19. So I didn't really have a lot of choice financially. So I didn't move. And also I was I just finished my first 2 years at college at that point and was going to do another 2 years. And I was a bit unsure about how that might pan out accordingly. So that was in the back of my head. But the cool side was that two techs came in who we had to train at the time. And what was really nice is the department, so there was various other departments within this immunological area. We'd go out a lot clubbing. And various other things as well. The two people that had come in to be trained up to basically fill the roles that we would be vacated by us not moving along, because they actually lived in that part of the country, so they came down to be trained up and were on quite good expenses as well. So yeah, we had a great time at that point on expenses. when they'd sort of, come down during the week, and then they'd go back home at the weekends, and then just rinse repeat. But yeah, had fantastic time going out clubbing and getting up to all sorts of other things as well. And so for me, I have fantastic memories of all of this stuff being played, and one of the people that I was training, they were big into New Order and Joy Division, which I was at the time. And so, yeah, it really made our day when we would be at the club and they'd play, either the Joy Division sing. That's why I perked up when I saw it was in the chart, because it reminded me of that period. And then obviously I was pretty sad when, all my friends then, and the two friends that I'd made then ended up moving halfway across the country. And we did try and keep in contact, but this is pre-internet days, so it was pretty tricky. And this was before I think I got my car. I got a car sometime after that, when I started down in Brighton at college. So, and one more thing, just in reference to that, is so this, I'm sure I've mentioned it in other videos. I grew up around Forest Row. If you're not familiar with the UK too well, here's the south coast of England. So down here we've got all these dots because this is Brighton, where I mentioned I've spent a lot of my youth and adult life hanging out in. This is over here, we have Gatwick Airport, but this is East Grinstead, and this is primarily at the time where we used to go clubbing. And I've just got this here as a final note. So it's long gone now, but where this thing is, I did it by postcode. There used to be a nightclub here called Martine's Nightclub, and this is where we used to go a lot. One of the other members in the other lab, a senior technician, who actually also ended up not moving. They stayed on at the same firm that I did and didn't take the move. They had all these free tickets to the nightclub because they were a full member. It was back when Martine's had membership. And so they were able to sort of sign us in. And I can remember at the time, it was funny because I would have been like 19, 20, and I think it was actually over 21s at that point. So yeah. But I think they were pretty lenient. There wasn't any in the UK at that point, it's still the same, if you're over 18 you can drink in a pub. But some clubs had over 21 rules, but they were pretty loosely enforced. I think as long as you were over 18, they didn't really care. And this is now an appliance store. And it's funny because I've not been to the UK now for a number of years mainly because of COVID, actually. Well, yeah, because of COVID. And so, I'll hopefully be going soon. But, this has probably changed a lot in the last 2 to 3 years from what I remember it. But the Martine's nightclub, which was there back in the day, that would have closed sometime, I don't know, in the 90s maybe. And before that, it was a nightclub called Clouds. And I can remember when I was at school, the school used to rent that out, and we used to have our school discos there in the evening, and we thought it was really posh. But they subsequently moved. There was a nightclub in here somewhere. I don't even know if it's still there. And later in the 90s, I used to hang out there when I was working at Radio Rentals, which I'd mentioned before, which was over here. At this point, I was working, the lab that I worked at was down on an industrial estate, way down at the end of East Grinstead, very close to an area referred to as Fellbridge. And I worked down at this end of East Grinstead. I used to go to a pub at lunchtime when we worked down the labs down here, called the Star, I think it was. And where the factory was, yeah, it looks like it's been massively redeveloped. It was somewhere around here. Yeah, this has all been redeveloped. I didn't know this had been knocked down sometime in the 90s. Yeah, wow. That brings back memories. Anyway, thanks once again for watching. Bye for now, and I will catch you in the next video.